have seen a root cellar from a peculiar angle, flat on my back, looking up, blood in my eyes. We'll get to the turnips. But first, when I was about 4 years old, I lived on an old farm. There were two families, ours in one part of the house and another family in the other. Howie was the son of the second family. He was about my age. And there was this root cellar that was built into the side of the hill, which is the way they usually are. And one day, Howie and I were playing a game. We would go up to the top, drop a rock, drop a board, and then we would run down to get them, haul them back up, drop them again. Just kids being kids, unsupervised at the age of 4. No worries. So I ran down to get the board, and I remember having this feeling. And I looked up and I said to Howie, "Don't drop that rock while I'm down here." Howie dropped the rock. And the next thing I knew, I was sitting on a chair in the house with blood streaming down my face and hair. "What happened?" my poor panicked mother asked. "Howie dropped a rock on my head." Stitches. I'm totally fine. But that root cellar, cold, dark, smelling of earth and old apples and mushrooms and something you can't quite name, earthy. It's just earthy smelling. That root cellar was not just a place for small children to injure each other. It was the difference between eating and not eating. Today we're talking about the hungry season. It's the time of year in 19th century New England when winter was almost over, but not quite. When the root cellar was getting low, when the garden was still frozen solid, and when spring felt like a rumor, and when the answer to almost every question about what's for supper was turnips. Now let's set the scene. It's March in New England, maybe early April. The snow is still on the ground, maybe a lot, or maybe just in patches if we're lucky. The ground is frozen, nothing is growing yet. Now, back in the fall, you laid in your stores. You were careful, you planned. You filled that root cellar in your pantry with everything you could coax out of the garden and the orchard and the smokehouse. Potatoes, turnips, parsnips, beets, carrots, dried beans, salt pork, smoked ham, pickled vegetables, apples packed in sawdust, barrels of cider, cornmeal, whatever you could preserve, pickle, smoke, salt, or dry. In October, it seemed like plenty. But here's the thing about a New England winter. It's very, very long. So long. By March, the salt pork is almost gone. The apples are soft and questionable. The potatoes are sprouting in the dark, those long, ghostly tentacles reaching out. And the dried beans are rattling around the bottom of the bin. The pickles were finished weeks ago. And the turnips are eternal. There's a reason they call this the hungry season, or the starving time, or, and this is my favorite, the 6 weeks of want. 6 weeks of want, because that's roughly how long you had to endure from when the stores gave out to when the earth finally mercifully started producing again. 6 weeks of wanting. Now, here's where I have to give proper credit. 19th century New England farm wives were extraordinary. They could make something out of almost nothing, as my own mother used to do. She could make soup out of thin air and call it supper. My mother's name was Esther, and I miss her very much. Another Esther, Esther Howland, author of the New England Economical Housekeeper, published in 1845, understood this completely. Her cookbook wasn't about elegant entertaining. She was no Martha Stewart. It was about surviving with dignity. I like to think all of the Esthers understood each other. Her instructions for turnips: boil them, mash them fine, add potato if you have it, season with salt and pepper, moisten with cream and butter, if available. 2 words that tell you everything about life in the hungry season. And Lydia Maria Child, whose American Frugal Housewife was practically a Bible for New England households, understood that cooking in hard times was less about recipes and more about resourcefulness. Dining in the 19th century was more about sustenance than about creation of nutritious and delicious meals. Which brings us to the turnip. Now, I want you to think about Bubba from the movie Forrest Gump. Forrest's best good friend, Bubba, knew shrimp. Every preparation, every possibility. He had devoted serious intellectual energy to the question of shrimp. The New England farm wife of the 1850s had devoted the same serious intellectual energy to the turnip. You could boil a turnip, you could mash a turnip, you could roast a turnip, you could make turnip sauce, which sounds more elegant than it really is. It's basically mashed turnip with potato added, if available. You could make turnip soup, you could make turnip stew, turnip pie, spicy turnip pie for a change of pace. You could make turnip pudding. You could make turnip puff. You could make turnip souffle, which sounds very grand for something that's been sitting in your cellar since October. You could make turnip bake with a buttered breadcrumb crust. You could add turnip to your boiled dinner. You could pickle a turnip, though by March you probably had already consumed that. You could add turnip greens to your salad if you still had greens at that point. You could put a turnip in your soup to make it look like there was more in the pot than there actually was. And that is a lot of ways to eat a turnip, but it's still a turnip. Now, before we get too comfortable picking on turnips, let's be clear about something. The hungry season wasn't just inconvenient, it could be genuinely dangerous. Scurvy, the disease we associate with sailors on long voyages, appeared in New England farm families in late winter. Months without fresh vegetables meant months without vitamin C. Bleeding gums, aching joints, profound exhaustion. In children and the elderly, it could be fatal. Mothers often ate less so their children could eat more. And that wasn't so much a sentiment, it was a survival strategy. The woman who kept the household running had to keep the children strong enough to make it to spring. And then there were the extraordinary years, the years when the hungry season became something much darker. In 1816, known ever after as the year without a summer, a massive volcanic eruption halfway around the world sent ash into the atmosphere that blocked the sun over New England. Snow in June, crops freezing in July. In Maine and New Hampshire, farmers cut up whole fields of corn just to use it as animal fodder. Thomas Robbins of Connecticut wrote in his diary that spring these sparse words: "The vegetation does not seem to advance at all." A minister in Kittery, Maine, summed up the entire year in one sentence: crops cut short and a heavy load of taxes. And on a gravestone in Vermont, someone thought this achievement worth carving in granite forever. Cold season of 1816 raised 40 bushels of wheat on this land, which kept his family and neighbors from starvation. 40 bushels of wheat carved in stone because it saved lives. That's the hungry season at its worst. But even in ordinary years, even in years when the volcano wasn't blocking the sun, March and April in New England were a test of endurance that every family faced every single year, week after week, of wondering if the turnips would hold out. Then something happened. You walked outside one morning in late April and the ground was different. The air was different. Something was pushing up through the last of the mud, the first green things. After months of turnips and salt pork and dried beans, those first green things were not just food. They were a miracle. New Englanders were serious about their spring tonics. Bitter greens, things like dandelion greens and watercress and sorrel, were gathered the moment they appeared, not just because they tasted good after a winter of root vegetables, but because your body was genuinely craving what they contained: the vitamins, the minerals, the freshness. Your body knew before your mind did. Now, I love dandelions. I let them grow in my yard. Some people might reach for the weed killer, but not me, because I know what those bright yellow flowers meant to a New England farm wife in April of 1850. They meant vitamins. They meant color. They meant that winter was finally, truly over. And of course, I keep them for the bees. Another spring favorite in New England is fiddlehead ferns. Those tightly coiled little spirals pushing up through the forest floor were practically a celebration. Tender, bright, tasting of spring itself. If you've never eaten fresh fiddleheads sautéed in butter, put it on your list. It tastes like hope after a long winter. And maple sugaring, which happened in late winter before the ground fully thawed, wasn't just about sweetness. Maple syrup is genuinely nutritious. After months of a diet that was heavy and starchy and monotonous, the taste of fresh maple syrup on fresh snow was something people remembered their entire lives. And when the hens first start to lay that first egg of spring, the first green shoot from the garden, the first fish from the thawing river, these weren't small things. They were the signal that you'd made it through. That spring always came. It always came. But the 6 weeks between when the stores gave out And when the earth woke up again, those 6 weeks required everything a New England family had. My mother could make soup out of nothing. And that wasn't just a personal quirk or a Depression era habit. It was a tradition that goes back generations in New England families and in families everywhere who learned out of absolute necessity that you use what you have. You waste nothing. You find the nutrition in whatever is available. And you feed your family. Every single day, women have stood in their kitchens in 1850 and in 1950 and right now today and faced that eternal question: what's for supper? And they answered it with what they had, with creativity and patience and love, and sometimes, let's be honest, with a turnip. This video is for them, for every woman who ever looked at the bottom of the root cellar and figured it out anyway. The hungry season officially ended with the 20th century and modern food systems. You can buy fresh strawberries in January now. Think about what that would have been like in the olden days. A fresh strawberry in January. Miracles. Nobody in New England is eating turnips now because there is literally nothing else, or at least we hope so. But there is something worth remembering in the 6 weeks want. Something about resourcefulness, about endurance, about the extraordinary, ordinary women who stood in cold kitchens in March and figured out one more way to make a turnip into supper. They didn't complain about it in their diaries, they just did it. And come April or May, they walked outside and they found dandelion greens. The hungry season was over. They'd made it through. I'll see you again somewhere in time.